This is part 2 of the Linn LP12 getting the perfect bounce. It's going to be simplified because each body, each table is a little different. But I want to give you some of the basic ways of keeping you sane without going nuts. These are things that I've experienced over the years, tips that I picked up from Audiophile Systems, the distributor, as to how to achieve the bounce, again, without going nuts. And there are Linn turntables out there that inherently will start out trying to drive you nuts. And that's just the truth of it. Nobody likes to say that, but it's manufacturing. Not everything is perfect. Okay, we've gone ahead and stripped away the bottom plate here so we can go in. Now, this is the table I showed you last week with the bounce that we wanted. And you have, interestingly enough, like the Thorns turntables, you have a 3-point sprung suspension. And that's what that's what we'd be tuning from. And we'll come to the other side and let you see the tone arm lead in here as well. So here you can see the fitting, the tone arm coming in and through the clip and then out. Newer tables actually have a secondary clip here. Again, trying to isolate vibration away coming up the lead. I used to terrorize people by taking phono leads and just rubbing them against one another without doing anything more, and you could literally hear the sound coming through the cartridge. So that's how quickly vibration can get moved around. Now, what I want to talk about is how to keep yourself from going nuts. And my recommendation to anybody, certainly not with a new table, but with older ones that you may have acquired secondhand or whatnot, I would sincerely encourage you to get yourself a new set of grommets, both top and bottom, and a new set of springs. And the reason for this is that there are occasions where one of the springs in what you're trying to work with is nothing short of a mischievous elf. And no matter how hard you try, you can't get the bounce going right. You should be able to get a reasonable bounce within the first half hour. This is not a 3 to 10 hour experience. If you go over 30 minutes, that's where I would recommend replacing one of the springs and having at it again, because sometimes it's a spring that can drive you nuts. Now, from the bottom side on the newer tables, and they've actually advanced past this, we have locking M nuts in each position. And as you'll see from looking at here versus here and here, the amount of compression is a little different on each position because of the amount of weight that's being put upon it. One of the things that can also happen while trying to get the bounce is that it can become tensioned up on the grommet itself. I've had a couple people comment that they thought they had the tune, and then they hear this kind of squeak when they bounce the Platter system. And what's happening is that the spring itself is cocked in such a way that it's actually binding on the rubber. Now, there's two potential causes for this. One is that you've got the springs out of tune, so the whole thing is shifted to one side or another. Your arm board, as I showed you last week, should be squared up. No side having a greater gap than another. The other source of it, and I covered this on another earlier video, is that your actual shafts for the suspension, these are not straight. They're not perpendicular to the plinth. So when we're going to set up a table, we make sure that we have the table perfectly level front to back. That's why we have adjustable feet on the stand to allow us, to compensate for anything that we see going on. And so that we can actually begin the actual tuning process without the interference of it being, unlevel. Now, whether you need to use new grommets or not is not an absolute. I usually typically do it because on older tables it's rubber and they begin to dry out and get stiff, so they lose a bit of their compliance, and that's all part of the engineering of it. These grommets, by the way, you'll also find on many of the older Thorns turntables, and if you look at this, you'll swear it's one and the same, and sometimes I think they are, but I'm sure they're not. But you'll recognize these very quickly. Now, when starting out the tune, one of the things you may do is to take the washer on the bottom, press up on it, and snap, let it go, because sometimes the springs themselves can get a little twisted, and what you're trying to do is to let the spring set in its natural position as opposed to anything being caused by the grommets. So snapping is not unusual. It helps you tune the deck. Now, I'll be back in a second because I'll show you something else that we use as a basic guide in trying to get the perfect bounce. Now, when putting on and taking off a platter, please keep in mind that the platter is lacquered except for this surface here and its mating surface on the inner platter. Please keep your fingers off of it because it will eventually start showing mishandling and all sorts of funny little effects. Hold on here so I can see what I'm doing. So we've been dinking around with this deck, so I'm going to get into a little bit of it. One of the things we should be able to do when everything is balanced out right, and I like to use an Allen wrench, is I'll select an Allen wrench from my large supply and essentially fit it underneath the edge of the platter as I go around, because this should be matched all the way around. Now, if you come around here with the camera, I'll show you something that can happen on older decks, which makes this a little hard to use sometimes. If you notice here, we actually have the top plate slightly dipping down and bowing. So you're going to get a false read when trying to use this in that position. The armboard is perfectly flat. If you look at the top, front, and back corners, the armboard is flat with the plinth. It's the stainless steel top plate that's actually dished out a little bit. I've seen that in all sorts of directions. You can build, bend the top plate back into proper position, but that requires a complete tear down of the deck so that you can release the stainless steel top plate from the points here and in front. And in this case, I really wasn't that eager to get into that amount of work because it doesn't affect the sonic performance, at least in my experience. Again, we're bouncing it halfway between the pivot point and the bearing, and we should have a nice even up and down. Now at the moment we have a slight little run around, which I'm probably because I messed with the spring. But if you look at it, let me get it going, you'll see how it kind of acts and then it doesn't act. And that spring's being slightly out of tune again. Now this table has been moved around the store 4 or 5 times. I can't speak for how it was moved or what they secured down. So I'm not upset about it, I'll just fix it and we'll be on our way. Now, when you're doing the tuning, one of the things that should be removed is the tone arm lead from the collar of the tone arm itself. The bounce itself should be perfect. Once you have that, that's when you make sure that your bend and flexibility here is correct, and you add this, and it should not affect the bounce. I run into tables where it seemingly sort of bounced the minute I took the tone arm lead off, oh, it just went wandering all over the place. And what they were whoever set it up was actually using the tone arm lead as kind of like a forced spring, I guess, but it's not the way you do things. This is the last thing you attach on. The bounce should be right before you attach this. In earlier videos, I talk about tools that I prefer having. There are folks, particularly out of the UK, that feel that they can do a setup for the bounce without having a jig. I guess they're using a dining table and splitting it open. I'm not sure what they're doing. If it works for them, that's fine. I don't want you going out and buying a jig. They're not cheap. For a dealer, it's an investment so we can do all the tables right. I have 2 jigs because sometimes I'm actually doing 2 tables back to back or simultaneously, or that the plinth itself here might be of a different shape and size, and so I actually need to use a different jig to hold the deck. That can happen. So we've got the bottom off. Oh, by the way, as you pull screws, wood screws, out of any wood product, but including an LP12, make sure you position them in the exact same spot where you pulled them from. The reason being is that the thread of the screws is a little different on every screw, as much as they'd like to make them perfect. And it's more ideal to use the exact screw, back it up a little, hear the click, and then run the screw in, so you're not creating new thread lines and weakening the wood itself. It's just one of those little quirky things I do. It's obviously a bit more important when you're dealing with speaker drivers as opposed to little feet. But it's a good habit to get yourself into. So there we are. Those are the basics. My mechanically going through it is going to be nothing more than what I talked about. I do have a nut runner tool. That's a very handy piece to have. My tool kit is not here, so I'm not going to be messing with that too much. But getting it or a socket, is ideal, so that you can raise and lower this without a whole lot of tension. I do not recommend the use of pliers. They're very clumsy and very inaccurate, and you just don't want to screw anything up. So that's pretty much it. That's what's going for the perfect tune. If you have questions, you're more than welcome to ask them. If you have tips for other viewers who have LP12s, you're most welcome to add them in the comments section. So those people watching the video, keep an eye on the comments, because you may have some extra helpful tips on it. And there we are. Thank you.